Johnson's speech pattern, and which was familiar to my ear at this time from hearing it and so forth.
For decades, Jack Nicholson ruled Hollywood with a grin that could charm an audience and eviscerate a rival in the same breath. The devil's smile that told the world he was always in on a joke no one else had heard yet. To the public, he was the rebel genius, the man who broke every rule and got rewarded for it, the actor who turned madness into art and sin into box office. But privately, Nicholson lived by a simple code: respect the craft or get the hell out of his way. And when that code was broken, the consequences were permanent. Nicholson did not forgive. He did not forget. He did not bury the hatchet for the sake of a future collaboration or a polite awards show handshake. He carried grudges like trophies, cataloging betrayals with the precision of a historian and the bitterness of a wounded soldier. At 88, with the industry that once worshipped him fading in relevance, Nicholson finally admitted what insiders had whispered for years. 6 names crossed the line. 6 giants. 6 legends. 6 people he swore he would never work with again. Some were idols who collapsed under the weight of their own myth. Some were co-stars whose instability turned scenes into disasters. Some were younger stars who dared to mistake polished technique for soul. And one destroyed Nicholson's greatest artistic dream before his eyes. These 6 figures didn't just frustrate him, they violated something sacred in Nicholson's worldview, the belief that acting was a battlefield where only honesty mattered. "I don't hate easily," he once said, "but when I do, it's forever." And so begins the story of the 6 Hollywood legends Jack Nicholson quietly exiled from his world, starting with a mentor who became his bitterest disappointment. Marlon Brando was the first man to break Jack Nicholson's faith in acting, and the wound came not from rivalry but from worship, because long before Nicholson became Hollywood's Devil King, he was just another young actor staring at Brando like a myth made real, the man who proved acting could bleed, as Jack once described him, the genius who tore the old theater style to shreds and replaced it with raw, dangerous truth, and Nicholson dreamed of one day trading blows with that genius. But when that dream finally arrived in 1976 on the set of the Missouri Breaks, it rotted into a nightmare. Brando showed up overweight, detached, and almost hostile to the idea of actually doing the work, refusing to memorize lines, plastering cue cards on lamps, chairs, tables, even the crew, drifting through scenes like a ghost who had somewhere better to be. The man Nicholson had once called sacred now looked like a parody of himself, muttering in ridiculous accents, demanding bizarre wardrobe choices, and sabotaging the rhythm of every scene, not with brilliance but with boredom. Nicholson was furious. "Genius doesn't excuse laziness," he snapped. "A lazy genius is just a fraud." And to Nicholson, Brando was committing the one sin he couldn't forgive, treating the craft like a joke. When the film collapsed critically and commercially, Nicholson never spoke to Brando again about the work, never attempted another collaboration, never sought closure. He kept the admiration for the early films, for Streetcar and On the Waterfront, but the man himself was dead to him. Years later, when Brando shrugged, "Acting is just lying for a living," Nicholson heard the final betrayal, because for Jack, acting wasn't lying, it was truth, and the hero who inspired him to believe in that truth ended up mocking it. Shelley Duvall was never supposed to be an enemy, but on the set of The Shining in 1980, Nicholson discovered that the wrong partner can turn acting from a dance into a slow-motion car crash, and the resentment that brewed there became one of the strangest wounds of his career. Jack arrived on Kubrick's set ready for precision, for psychological warfare, for performance that demanded control even as it portrayed insanity, and he expected his on-screen wife to meet him at the same temperature. What he found instead was fragility, beautiful, heartbreaking fragility, but fragility that shattered rhythm and continuity and drained scenes of momentum. Kubrick's infamous cruelty only amplified the disaster, pushing Duvall to tears, to panic, to exhaustion, to the edge of a breakdown, and Nicholson, who thrived on instinct and structure, found himself acting opposite a woman who was collapsing in real time. "As an actor, you need a dance partner," he later muttered, but Shelley was dancing to a different song, and to Nicholson that mismatch was unforgivable because it made every scene twice as heavy and half as truthful. While Kubrick drove Duvall into hysterics for the sake of realism, Jack seethed at the lack of control, at the unpredictability, at the constant emotional resetting between takes. The performance the world sees now, a trembling, terrified Wendy, is legendary, but Nicholson, the memory was not triumph. It was chaos, and chaos that wasn't chosen was something he despised. Decades later, when Duvall's mental state deteriorated publicly, Nicholson softened, acknowledging what Stanley put her through was unconscionable, but it didn't erase the bitterness of those months trapped in a psychological pressure cooker. The film became a masterpiece, but it left behind the wreckage of a working relationship that died long before the final shot was taken. Tom Cruise was the first actor Nicholson ever described as perfect and empty, a brutal assessment that revealed the depth of Jack's contempt for performers who approached the craft like a technical exercise instead of a hunt for truth. When they collided in 1992 in A Few Good Men, the result on screen looked volcanic, Cruise hammering lines with surgical precision, while Nicholson unleashed that courtroom monologue that became one of the most famous explosions in film history. Audiences saw fireworks. Nicholson saw machinery. He believed acting was supposed to be dangerous, unpredictable, a knife fight where someone might actually get cut, and Cruise showed up with the exact opposite energy. Rehearsed, calculated, immaculate, every gesture polished to within an inch of lifelessness. You look in his eyes and you see the gears turning. Nicholson sneered, "It's perfect, but it's all gears." The insult wasn't about talent. Cruise had plenty. It was about philosophy. Cruise treated acting like an Olympic sport where discipline wins. Nicholson treated it like jazz where chaos births brilliance. During shooting, Jack threw raw fire at Cruise, trying to crack the perfection, trying to force surprise, trying to draw blood from a man who treated spontaneity like a liability. But Cruise refused to break. His responses were as smooth as studio recordings, flawless but dead to Nicholson's instincts. When the film wrapped, Nicholson made his judgment. "I respect him," he told colleagues, "but I'd never step on a set with him again." In Jack's universe, risk was the currency of art, and Cruise, despite being a megastar, despite being disciplined, despite being admired, committed the one sin Nicholson couldn't forgive. He made acting safe. And to Jack Nicholson's ion, safety was the enemy of truth. Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway wasn't just another co-star in Jack Nicholson's story. She was the actress who shattered one of his greatest artistic ambitions and left a permanent scar on his belief that creative dreams could survive Hollywood ego. Their chemistry in Chinatown 1974 was electric, the kind of pairing that made audiences believe that cinema could still produce miracles. And Nicholson carried that miracle like a torch for years, determined to direct and star in a long-awaited sequel. That dream was The Two Jakes, 1990, and it was supposed to be Jack's triumph, not as a performer, but as a director, a storyteller, a man completing a masterpiece. But when Dunaway arrived on set, that dream turned into open warfare. She challenged lines, questioned motivations, second-guessed blocking, showed up late, argued over interpretations, and turned every decision, no matter how small, into a negotiation. Nicholson, already carrying the impossible weight of directing, writing, and starring, finally snapped, "This isn't collaboration, it's sabotage," and to him it was exactly that. He believed that Dunaway wasn't destroying the film out of malice but out of pride, the pride of an actress who demanded to be the center of every scene even when the film demanded otherwise. The set became a battlefield of wills, and Nicholson, who expected reverence for the craft, instead found himself fighting for basic creative control. When the film ultimately collapsed, both critically and commercially, Nicholson did not simply lose a movie, he lost his faith in directing. He never directed another film again, and insiders swear Dunaway was the reason. To Nicholson, it wasn't just a professional failure. It was artistic death. Hollywood moved on, but Jack never forgot. "One film shouldn't kill a dream," he later muttered, but that one did. And in his private ledger of unforgivable sins, Faye Dunaway's name was written in permanent ink. Sean Penn. Sean Penn was one of the few directors who ever made Jack Nicholson feel caged. And to Nicholson, that sensation was worse than hatred. It was humiliation. When they teamed up for The Pledge in 2001, Nicholson walked into the project expecting collaboration, respect, and room to burn, because by then he was not just an actor, but an institution. Instead, he found a director obsessed with control, precision, and rigidly engineered realism. Penn didn't want Nicholson's instincts. He wanted obedience. Every pause, every glance, every vocal shift was dictated, measured, and corrected, and Nicholson, who built a career on improvisation and danger, suddenly found himself being directed like a rookie extra. "What's the point of hiring Jack Nicholson if you want a puppet?" he hissed privately, a line that circulated around town for years because it revealed the one thing Jack despised more than bad acting: micromanagement. Penn believed he was sculpting greatness. Nicholson believed he was suffocating. Scenes that should have felt alive became mechanical cardio, repetition without discovery, and Jack later compared the experience to running a marathon with your feet tied together. You can move, but you'll never fly. Though the film earned critics' praise, Nicholson walked away angry, drained, and betrayed by a director he once respected. To Penn, the method was craft. To Nicholson, it was vandalism, a violation of the sacred space where instinct is supposed to reign. After production wrapped, Nicholson privately vowed never to work with Penn again, and he never did. Hollywood insiders tried to brush it off as generational friction, but Nicholson did not see friction. He saw a crime. "You don't cage animals born to hunt," he snapped. And in his personal ledger of unforgivable sins, Penn was the entry that represented the worst violation of all, stealing the fun out of art. Leonardo DiCaprio was the actor who forced Jack Nicholson to confront the generational divide he spent his entire career pretending didn't exist, and the clash between them on The Departed, 2006, became a silent war that never made headlines but left Nicholson privately convinced that Hollywood had replaced danger with homework. DiCaprio arrived on set prepared with binders of character research, psychological breakdowns, and meticulously designed behavioral tics, the new school's religion of preparation, and Nicholson hated it instantly. To him, acting wasn't supposed to be engineered. It was supposed to be discovered in the moment, chaotic, visceral, unpredictable, like a live wire dragged across a flooded stage. DiCaprio, by contrast, built his performances like architecture, brick by brick, calculated and sturdy, leaving no gaps for instinct to enter. "He's done all the homework," Nicholson muttered, "but there's no danger," and that single word, danger, was the chasm between them. Their scenes crackled on camera, but behind the lens Nicholson felt like he was throwing Molotov cocktails at a man in a bulletproof suit. The most infamous moment came when Nicholson pulled a real gun, unloaded but unannounced, during a tense scene just to jolt DiCaprio out of structure. Scorsese kept rolling, and the fear on DiCaprio's face was real, but once the camera cut, the fury was real too. To Nicholson, the moment proved acting still had blood. To DiCaprio, it proved Nicholson was reckless. After filming wrapped, both men were polite, both praised each other publicly, both pretended the collaboration was harmonious, but insiders knew the truth. Nicholson walked away convinced DiCaprio was too safe, and DiCaprio walked away convinced Nicholson was a relic from a more chaotic era. The film won Best Picture, but for Nicholson, it carried a bitter aftertaste, proof that a movie can triumph while the craft itself dies. Now at 88, Jack Nicholson lives in a quieter Hollywood than the one he conquered, and the 6 names he swore off remain untouched wounds in his private history. For Nicholson, these weren't feuds. They were evidence that the craft he worshipped could be cheapened by laziness, fragility, vanity, control, or fear. Brando broke his faith. Duvall broke his rhythm. Cruise broke his danger. Dunaway broke his ambition. Penn broke his freedom. DiCaprio broke his future. Hollywood moved on, the spotlight dimmed, and the man who once electrified screens with a grin now watches an industry that no longer values the chaos he saw as truth. Nicholson didn't hate because he was cruel. He hated because he cared too violently about a craft that refuses to love its believers back. Whether he was right or wrong hardly matters. The name shaped him, hardened him, and taught him that even legends keep score.